Hello all, welcome back. Thank you for being here. Sorry about my absence last week. I was on vacation the week prior and then could not get my head in the game. Even writing this script for today took me far too long. But I am here now, and if this is your first time being here, my name is Madeleine Klein, and I talk about all things Canadian true crime, missing persons, mystery, and history. I have quite the case for you today. It is, as always, pretty heavy, and this one particularly hits close to home for me. Today I'm going to tell you about rapist, murderer, and arsonist Allan Legere, also known as the Monster of the Miramichi. Miramichi is now a city in New Brunswick, but at the time of Legere's crimes, it wasn't. All of his crimes were committed in the region of the Miramichi River. I was actually in Miramichi last summer. I took this photo. My best friend lives in New Brunswick. I have visited several times. I absolutely adore New Brunswick. So I was surprised I hadn't heard about Allan Legere before Jordan from the Nighttime podcast told me about him. Nighttime has done 2 episodes on Allan Legere, which I will link below. Both are really good listens, but we will get started here. Allan Legere was born in Chatham Head, New Brunswick on February 13th, 1948, which was Friday the 13th. He grew up in poverty. He was often bullied. He was known for his violent outbursts and committing several crimes, like breaking and entering and robbery, things like that. He was in and out of prison for the majority of his life. He would break into people's homes that he knew and just stand at the end of their bed looking at them until they woke up. He just wanted to show them that he was capable of breaking in, even though they had their doors locked. He was terrifying and absolutely dangerous. On Saturday, June 21st, 1986, his petty crimes turned into heinous and disturbing ones. John and Mary Glendenning closed up their shop in Black River Bridge, New Brunswick around 6 p.m. They went to their home, which was only about 100 feet away from their little shop. John sat down in the living room and Mary went into the kitchen. At one point in the evening, they heard a huge crash, and when they looked at what is now their splintered front door, 2 men with their faces covered entered their home. One was holding a baseball bat and one was holding a large rock. Within seconds, the man holding the grapefruit-sized rock bludgeoned John Glendenning in the face, severely maiming him to the point he was unrecognizable. As John laid on the floor, he saw a third, older man enter the home and calmly watch as the other 2 tied Mary Glendenning to a chair, all while her husband was still alive and watching. Mary Glendenning was brutally raped, ordered to open the family safe, and was severely beaten to unconsciousness. I imagine the 3 thought Mary was dead, but eventually she came to and managed to pull herself up the stairs to call 911. When police showed up, Mary was barely alive and completely unrecognizable. Her face had been so brutally beaten. John was found in another bedroom, hands tied behind his back, bludgeoned with an alarm clock cord wrapped around his neck. He had unfortunately already succumbed to his injuries, but Mary miraculously made a full physical recovery. I can't imagine she ever healed psychologically or emotionally. It would thankfully only take about 2 days for arrests to be made. The 2 masked men were teenagers, 17-year-old Todd Matchett and 19-year-old Scott Curtis, as well as 38-year-old Allan Legere. Legere was arrested quickly as he hung around the area and was known in the community as a generally bad person and criminal. The 2 teens fled to Ontario and ended up surrendering themselves 2 days later. The teens both pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, but Legere did not, so they had to go ahead with the trial. The teens told the court that the original plan was they were supposed to go in and steal the safe while Legere waited in the getaway car. However, when they ended up not being able to handle John Glendenning, Legere entered the home and finished beating the man. He was found with a shoe print on his face. Legere testified, and when he got up on the stand, the first thing out of his mouth was, "I wasn't even there." So Legere was convicted in no time at all, thankfully. He was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole for 25 years and put in a maximum security facility. You're probably thinking, this is going to be the shortest episode ever, but we're just getting started. Buckle up, kitty cats. So Allan Legere was put away. Great. But during his time in prison, because he is a sociopath, he cleaned up his act just enough to gain the trust of the guards. On May 3rd, 1989, Legere was taken to a hospital because he had an ear infection, which he gave to himself by pouring urine into his ear. So the following events are obviously so very premeditated. 3 guards accompanied him to the treatment center where Legere said he had to use the washroom. He was absolutely not supposed to go in alone, but since he had gained the trust of these guards, he was allowed to go in unsupervised. Allan Legere shoved a television antenna up his rectum and made a makeshift key to pick the locks on his handcuffs. When he emerged from the bathroom, he threatened the guards with the antenna, which they thought was a knife. The guards were unarmed except for pepper spray, which was absolutely useless, and Legere escaped the facility. When he reached the parking lot, he saw a woman getting into her car. He hijacked the car, kidnapping the woman as well. He thankfully let the woman go physically unharmed, but kept the car. He went to Moncton, an area he was quite familiar with, and drove until he reached the woods, when he ditched the car and disappeared into the woods on foot. For 3 weeks, Legere kept quiet, except for a few break-and-enters and a car theft or 2. On May 29th, 1989, that all changed. In the early morning hours, a 911 call came in to report that Flam's grocery store was ablaze. Flam's grocery store was owned and operated by 75-year-old Annie Flam, and she had been running the local and beloved store since the late 1930s. Annie and her sister Nina lived just upstairs from the shop in a small apartment. It was the upstairs living space that was engulfed in flames, and when firefighters entered, they were met with Nina Flam dragging herself down the stairs, badly burnt, and appeared to be naked. When they got closer, it was revealed that her nightgown had just melted into her skin. If that wasn't horrific enough, what they found fighting the fire was even more horrifying. Upstairs, they found Annie Flam so severely burnt they couldn't recognize her, still tucked into her bed. Nina would survive this gruesome and disturbing scene, telling investigators that the man that did this raped her, tucked her into bed, and set the room on fire. They were pretty sure this was the work of Legere, but they had assumed he did this only to get money so he could flee. They never thought that he would stick around, but he did. There were similar attacks on other elderly residents of the Miramichi. One woman came home to her house on fire, and when they investigated, they found that all of her clothes had been piled on her bed before being lit. Another elderly couple had their home broken into, and they were both bound. Except one of them ended up regaining consciousness and managed to get out of the house to call for help. The intruder fled because he lost control of the situation. Although it's not definitively confirmed, it was most likely Legere who had developed a ritual, as so many serial killers do. However, at the time, investigators didn't put that together because they were so sure Legere had gotten the hell out of there after the Flam murder. For 5 months, though, Legere lived in the woods and off the land. It's speculated he could have had some help from others, but who knows? He made little teepees in the woods for shelter and stole food when he could. The residents of Miramichi relaxed a little bit over the summer months, as they were under the impression that the escaped Allan Legere was long gone. But on October 13th, 1989, the residents got a rude awakening with another horrific crime that nearly mirrored the murder of Annie Flam and the vicious assault on her sister Nina. Once again, an early morning 911 call reported a house on fire. When firefighters arrived, they found sisters Linda and Donna Donnie in the upstairs of the burning home. What happened in this case was the previous night, Linda had gone out for the evening and Donna remained home alone. Legere, who had a history of peeping in windows, had brought a ladder and was looking into the middle-aged woman's bedroom window. Linda came home and actually physically bumped into Legere, who then knocked her out cold with one punch. When he turned around to run, he knocked the ladder over, causing a racket. It's unfortunate that the neighbors actually heard the clatter but ignored it, thinking it wasn't a big deal. Legere ran into the house, busting through the back door. Donna was downstairs and put up a hell of a fight. There was a major struggle. Donna attempted to get up the stairs, but Legere caught her and smashed her head against the wall along the staircase. There were bloody fingerprints outside of the bedroom, suggesting Donna attempted to get out of the bedroom at one point. Allan Legere brutally beat Donna to death, sexually assaulted her lifeless body, and tucked her into bed. He then went outside and brought Linda, who was still unconscious but alive, back in the house. He sexually assaulted her and left her on the floor of Donna's bedroom before setting the house on fire. Linda's official cause of death was smoke inhalation. She was still alive when Legere left. Donna was dead before the fire even started. Her autopsy showed she had not only been brutally tortured, but she aspirated her own vomit. Even with the striking similarities between the murders, arson, and attacks, they still didn't think it was Legere. This was in 1989, and DNA testing was absolutely not what it is today. They did send samples of DNA off to Ottawa to be tested, but it took weeks for results. But although not hasty, they did get results eventually, and the DNA pointed to Allan Legere. The panic in Miramichi set in fast. The kids didn't even go trick-or-treating that year. Local clubs shut down because no one wanted to go out after dark, and many people, especially women, were terrified to enter their own homes. We're talking about a small town here. I imagine before this happened, people didn't even lock their doors. They probably left the keys in their car. People were petrified. So now that everyone knows Allan Legere is still there and still raping and murdering, the manhunt was on. Legere broke into a car at a house where a juror from his 1987 trial used to live. The juror and his wife had since moved, but Legere didn't know that. At one point, an officer with a dog was chasing someone on foot heading into the woods. When the dog was let off leash, Legere was cool as a cucumber, and there was no incident with the canine. Legere stopped, looked at the officer, and simply and coldly told him, "If you don't stop following me, I'm gonna have to kill you." This officer was like, "Okay, you fucking psycho." A little over a month later, on November 16th, 1989, the body of Father James Smith was found slaughtered. It said Legere knew police were closing in on him, so he took shelter in the rectory in which Father Smith lived. A rectory is a house the church provides for the priest to live in, often in close proximity to the church. Legere tortured Father Smith for hours, brutally beating him and cutting him with a knife. It said the house was a bloodbath. It was so brutal, Legere stomped on his chest, separating all of his ribs from his sternum. He did the same thing to his face. The bones in Father Smith's face were disconnected from his skull. Unfortunately, this murder took place on November 15th, but his body wasn't found until the 16th when Father Smith didn't show up for 7 p.m. service, giving Legere plenty of time to steal Father Smith's car and flee to Bathurst. Bathurst is about an hour and a half away, and when he got there, he got on a train to Montreal. So there was a notice put out, but there was some sort of miscommunication about a tattoo of an eagle on Legere's arm. Police got onto the train and started asking people, even slightly matching the description, to pull up their sleeves. They actually came across Legere on the train, and he calmly and coolly showed his arm to the police. But due to this miscommunication, they were like, "Oh, okay, good to go. Bye." He once again was calm, cool, and collected. Textbook sociopath. He ended up making it to Montreal and putting himself up in a swanky hotel with stolen money, but he just couldn't stay away from his hunting grounds and ended up going back to New Brunswick. Like, he could have gotten away with this. Bizarre. He gets to St. John, goes to a bar, writes a long, unhinged, poor me letter, and then gets into a cab to go back to Miramichi, which is 3 hours away. Sometime during this cab ride, Legere identifies himself to the cab driver, terrifying this man. By this time in November, it was already snowing and there was a snowstorm. The cab driver goes off the road and a female off-duty RCMP officer pulls over and asks if everything's okay. Legere pulls his weapon and kidnaps both of them. They needed to stop in Sussex to gas up. Legere takes the keys and goes inside to pay for the gas, leaving the two in the car. Fortunately, cab drivers almost always carry a second set of keys with them, so the two got the hell out of there to go call for help. Unfortunately, when Legere sees the car is gone, he hijacks a semi with the driver and continues through the snowstorm toward Miramichi. I'm assuming that this semi had to have been the only other vehicle at the gas station at the time, and there's no way he knew how to drive it, so he needed the driver. That's just speculation on my part. Amazingly, when they get into town around 5 a.m. on November 24th, somebody sees this massive truck on a road it had no business being on and called it in. Police surround the semi, and the driver got out and was like, "Not me, he's in the truck." At this point, Legere calmly exits the truck and says, "You got me." He was finally apprehended. I guess they ordered him to lay down, but he wouldn't lie flat, so an officer kicked him in the face, resulting in this infamous black eye. God, that had to have felt good. I hope it was a steel toe boot. Miramichi was, and I believe still is, a very Catholic town. It's the Irish capital of Canada. They literally rang church bells in celebration. Bars were packed that night. I love that. It's just so Irish of them. Allan Legere's second murder trial and conviction is the first in Canadian history where DNA evidence was used. So this is a really pivotal case. The trial went on and Legere did not testify this time, but he would start acting out and yelling when he got bored. So he was often put into a separate room during the mundane parts of the trial, like a child. He also had groupies, which many serial killers do, but there was one particular blonde groupie who was said to be hanging out with a juror. It was a big thing because they were like, "What the fuck, juror? We don't need this blonde bitch influencing you, resulting in a hung jury." I'm sure she was hot, but come on, man. Think with this head, not the other one. Anyway, all went well apparently because Allan Legere was found guilty on 4 counts of murder and received 4 life sentences with no chance of parole for 25 years. He spent 24 years in the Special Handling Unit in Quebec, and in 2015 he was transferred to Edmonton where he remains in Gen Pop. He did apply for parole in 2019 and they were like, "Absolutely not, next." I mentioned this before, but I'm gonna link 2 episodes of Nighttime down below. The first episode is like an in-depth deep dive with special guest Rick McLean. Rick McLean was not only one of the first reporters on the case and attended both trials, he has written 2 books about Allan Legere. Amazing episode, highly recommend. I'm also going to link a follow-up episode where Jordan reads excerpts of the Christmas card Legere sent him. It's unhinged and he is still fairly sociopathic. Before we part ways, I wanted to include what happened to the 2 teens convicted in Legere's first murder, Scott Curtis and Todd Matchett. Scott Curtis, who was 19 years old at the time of the crime, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received life in prison without the chance of parole for 16 years. He was granted day parole in September of 2001, even though he was still considered manipulative and a troublemaker, but he had started changing his ways in 1995. He couldn't clean up his act regarding associates, substance abuse, and other various criminal activity, and it said he also became cocky and overconfident. His release into a halfway house was revoked in 2003. He was denied full parole in 2004 and denied day parole in 2005. In November of 2007, he would be granted day parole. Less than a year later, in August of 2008, that would be revoked again for similar reasons. That only lasted 3 months, and he was again granted day parole in early 2009, and then granted full parole in July of 2010. Why do we play these games? Anyway, he died on June 7th, 2019 at the age of 52 of natural causes. I'm a little confused though because the articles I read stated that he was serving a life sentence at the time of his death. So was he in jail or not? Sounds like he got 10 years of freedom. Todd Matchett was 17 years old at the time of the crime and also pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He spent 20 years behind bars, being granted full parole in January of 2005 at the age of 37. He was said to be a model prisoner and parolee and really showed remorse for his role in the Glendenning robbery and murder. He was adamant he was a changed man at the time of his release. He moved to Vancouver and I believe is still there today. There is a book about him called Confessions of a Young Criminal. He didn't write it, but it's a biography, so I'm assuming he had a hand in publishing. But other than that, he's been laying pretty low. I couldn't find much on him. Believe me, I tried. But I think that is it for me for today. I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you for being here as always. Like, subscribe, comment, send a Christmas card. Just don't murder or kidnap anyone. I am not taking another hiatus, so I will catch you guys next week. Bye.